So the Nova Scotia Vacuum Cleaner Company was born in the backyard shed of Elmer Tress in Dave's hometown of Big Narrows, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Elmer was the cousin of the coal magnate John W. Tress, and I will leave it to others to tease out what passive-aggressive spasm led Elmer to suck coal dust out of Cape Breton parlors, while the rest of his family got rich digging the dirty black devil out of the ground. Don't know what got him going, but I know that his first vacuum was an enormous horse-drawn, coal-driven contraption that, well, looked like a fire wagon. Required 3 people to operate. And you can still find old-timers in Big Narrows who will tell you they remember Tress's 3 sons in their white shirts and plaid breeks, running enormous hoses across the sidewalks and over the lawns and through the windows of Big Narrows' best homes. If you get them going, they'll tell you that smoke-belching monstrosity left behind more dirt than it removed. It was Tress's poor wife, Eleanor, who convinced Elmer to give up on the Weezer, which is what she called it. Story goes that it was Eleanor who told him that selling cleaning services would never be as lucrative as selling cleaning devices. Tress was an inventor. He wasn't really interested in selling anything, but he was intrigued by the idea of miniaturizing his vacuum wagon. He called his first attempt the dust bilge, which was essentially a pump on wheels. Required 2 people to operate. As Elmer envisioned it, a husband and a wife. Woman directing the brush, while the husband followed on the pump. Elmer made 12 bilges in time for Christmas 1916. And according to Eleanor's records, they were all snapped up. Bilge came to a sorry, some would say predictable end. That Easter, the bewildered priest called on Eleanor. He was distraught over the state of all 12 of those marriages. Elmer didn't discourage easily. There were numerous prototypes over the decades, most famously the Eel, a water-filtered vacuum that humped its way around the house like a possessed bagpipe, which, due to a gasket flaw that Elmer never managed to correct, appeared to stop and take a leak every few minutes. And then came June 1939, and Elmer emerged from his yard with the prototype of what would become his masterpiece. A machine that Nova Scotians, who were lucky enough to own one themselves, still speak of in holy terms: the dirt dinghy. The dinghy was small and light and twice as powerful as any vacuum you could order from the Eaton's catalog. And as it is with all things, its strength also proved to be its weakness. In order to manage the suction, Tress had to make the dinghy's cloth dust bag seal tight to the machine. Otherwise, it kept flying off. Problem was, when it was full, a dust bag was next to impossible to empty. Some vacuum owners resorted to using other vacuum cleaners to suck the dirt out of the bag. People complained it took them as long to get the dirt out of the bag as it did to get it in. But the devoted, and there were many disciples in Big Narrows, were all happy to tack and jiggle the bag until there was at least enough room in there to use it again. Tress probably had the largest funeral in the history of Big Narrows. He was buried in the little cemetery out by Macaulay's Mountain. Certainly had the largest gravestone. You can see it yourself today if you would get down there. It's a concrete steeple with a ball on the top and 3 words, without apparent irony, inscribed on all 4 sides for all to read: dust to dust. Tress was still revered when Dave was a boy. Dave still remembers the class trip to Tress's backyard workshop, his grade 5 project on suction, and the fading billboard out by the highway, Big Narrows it read, a town that really sucks. No one knows for sure how many dirt dinghies Tress produced, certainly fewer than 100. So for those who loved them, they became a treasured possession and then a precious heirloom. Dave got his from his Aunt Elizabeth. It arrived out of the blue some 20 years ago. Came on an autumn afternoon, and it came in the original maple crate. Dave, home alone at lunch, had it unpacked and plugged in almost immediately. Soon as he stepped on the starter, the dinghy emitted a familiar and comforting, ear-piercing wail. Dave stepped back and grinned. There was a time when the entire town used to sound like that. Then he looked down at the brush head, which had seized the little area rug by the kitchen table. It looked as if it was going to suck it right up the hose. Dave turned off the vacuum and tugged the rug free. The vacuum clearly had astonishing possibilities. The dinghy could probably suck up dirt buried deep in the cracks of the floorboards, dirt so deep it might have come off the boots of that World War I soldier who had once lived in his house. And so began one of the most difficult periods of Dave and Morley's marriage. The dinghy screamed like a banshee, and while it screamed, Dave followed it around as happily as a banshee's mother. It was like owning his very own Zamboni. There was a light gray carpet downstairs that he could make as smooth as a newly flooded rink. But there was something else at play. The vacuum was encouraging Dave's deepest, darkest anxieties. He wasn't only sucking dust and smoothing carpets. He was waging a war. He was battling armies of microscopic invaders, dust mites and retroviruses, microbes and germs. Armed with a 50-year-old vacuum cleaner, Dave was sinking into a hypochondriacal mania. Before long, he was vacuuming every day. And before long, that raised a troubling question. When does a hobby become an obsession? Or more to the point, when does an obsession become an illness? I'll tell you when. When your wife says so, that's when. You are telling me I can't vacuum anymore, said Dave. He was standing in the living room beside the dinghy. He was wearing rubber gloves and a white lab coat. Do you have any idea, he said, how many women would find it desirable to have their husband vacuum cleaning? He pulled a paper face mask up over his chin. He adjusted the orange ski goggles he had found in the cupboard. What am I, said Dave, 10 years old? He waited for a day until he had calmed down. During that day, he mulled over what she had said to him, and he consulted Kenny Wong at lunchtime, and he decided he would deal with her edict like a man. He began to vacuum in secret. Vacuuming became his secret pleasure. It only took Morley a week to figure out what was going on. Oh, there were plenty of telltale signs. She'd come home from work and the carpet would be clean and smooth, or she would smell a pipe tobacco odor of vacuum exhaust. She decided she would allow Dave his little secret, but she decided she would monitor him. She left things on the floor, paper clips and pennies. If it got out of hand, she would step in. It was a spring afternoon. A year after his vacuuming privileges had been revoked, Dave was home alone. He was standing in the living room, and he was staring at the guinea pig and her filthy cage. It happened so fast, it's hard to describe. Dave didn't really see it himself. He just heard the soft whoomph of her hitting the inside of the bag. He switched off the dinghy in horror. Remarkably, the pig seemed to have survived. He had the bag laid out on the kitchen table. You could see her moving around in there. But he couldn't get her out no matter how hard he tried. He pushed and he pulled and he pried and he shook. He tried to lure her out with a carrot. When Morley came home, he was sitting there with a pig squirming around in his lap. He was picking lint off it. Vacuum bag was on the table. Dave looked like he had been crying. He only said one word: cesarean. That weekend, Morley brought a new vacuum into their house. Told Dave he was not allowed to touch it. He promised. "My vacuuming days are over," said Dave. Besides, with a bag cut, what could he do? He wrapped up the dinghy's electric cord, he put the machine back into its maple case, and he carried the whole kit and caboodle downstairs into the basement. 10 years passed. Was it 10 years? I don't know. Maybe more. Time passed. World changed. One night, Dave was fooling around on the computer, and he stumbled on someone selling old dirt dinghy parts. And they had a dust bag. It arrived in a little cardboard box. Next day, he slunk home at lunch when he knew the house would be empty. He began in the living room. The moment he turned on that machine and heard that ear-splitting whine, he felt the old bliss settle upon him. Back and forth he went, up and then down. It was surprising how fast it came back to him, the comforting, energizing push and pull. His arms extending and flexing like a varsity rower, like an athlete returning to his beloved sport. It was while he was working around the yellow blanket box at the foot of their bed that he was startled by the unmistakable vibration of metal being sucked up the long vacuum handle. He stopped. He turned the dinghy off. He looked down, and there on the blanket box lay one of his wife's pearl stud earrings. Clearly, he just sucked up the other. He looked at his watch. It was 4:30. Good grief, how did it get so late? He took the bag downstairs, and once again he sat down at the kitchen table. This time he got out a pair of kitchen tongs and worked them through the finicky seal. He wrestled out a dense clump of matted dirt. Took a fork and a knife, and he slowly pulled it apart. He found a perplexing volume of weird-looking gray dust. A twist tie, a safety pin, a few paper clips, a clump of feathers. Feathers? A Cheerio. They hadn't had Cheerios in the house for years. Maybe the chicken had brought the Cheerios in. Some popcorn kernels, a button, a dime and a nickel, and a handful of pennies, a screw, what looked like a piece of dehydrated carrot, but no earring. He was sure it was in there. He'd heard it go in, the rattle of it. He leaned back and took a deep breath. And that is when he heard Morley pull into the driveway. She was home early. People often report that in a time of crisis, things move as if they reveal themselves in slow motion. In slow motion, Dave rolled up the vacuum bag and the newspaper, pulled open the kitchen cupboard, and he stuffed his little pile behind the row of cereal boxes. Closed the cupboard, he waved his hand in the air, trying to disperse the hovering cloud of dust. He ran upstairs, he rammed the vacuum cleaner into his closet, he shut the closet door, and that's when Morley called him, and she did not call, "I'm home," or "Anybody here?" or not even "Hello." 4 fateful words. "You have been vacuuming." Dave looked down at his pants. He was covered in lint, feathers, and dust. He decided he'd deal with it like a man. He locked himself in the bathroom. Morley came upstairs and sat by the door. "You're going to have to come out sometime," she said. He was pulling feathers off his pants and flushing them down the toilet. He knew she knew. She knew he knew. But he just couldn't admit to what he had done. It had to do with pride, is what it had to do with. And pride, as we all know, cometh just before the fall. Came home early the next day and extracted another lump from the dust bag. Once again, he came up empty. And once again, with the exquisite timing that makes you believe the universe is a malevolent trickster, Morley pulled into the driveway early. This time he thrust the vacuum bag and the newspaper-wrapped packet of dirt under the couch. Later that night, when Morley was obviously asleep, breathing rhythmically, he lifted the covers, slid out of bed, padded downstairs, and went right to the living room, pulled out the packet of dirt from under the couch. "Dave?" Was there no peace? It was the middle of the night. The dust bag was still under the couch. He looked around desperately. "Coming!" he said, and she was too, coming down the stairs, and so he rammed the newspaper-wrapped packet of dirt into the umbrella stand. Morley was unusually rushed the next morning. You look great," said Dave when she came downstairs. She was all dressed up. She did look great. There was a press conference she was attending. Dave was hovering in the hallway. He was waiting for her to leave so he could reclaim the dust packet from the umbrella stand. Morley had her hand on the door, and for some weird reason, time was slowing down again. Because it was raining, that's why. And now Morley was on the front porch about to open her blue umbrella. And Dave was standing on his tiptoes at the front door, peering through the front door window. He didn't say anything. He just watched as the folded packet of newspaper exploded on her head. An explosion of fine gray dust, feathers, and pieces of dehydrated carrot. Though not dimes, nickels, or that handful of pennies, Dave had carefully plucked them out of the bag one by one, wondering as he did whether a man could make a living going through discarded vacuum bags at dump sites. Thought returned as he watched Morley turn slowly to face the door, blinking through the layer of dust that clung to her face. "I just might have a chance to find that out," he thought. Last thing he noticed before she came back in was the sheen from both of her pearl earrings glinting through the darkness.